This video is in response to a recent comment left by a YouTuber called Stardusk in regards to an event that unfolded in the last several days in the men's rights movement. Essentially a YouTuber and men's rights activist who has made a lot of men's rights videos on her channel called Girlwriteswhat, and who has received a lot of support for it, decided to post and decided to comment on a video left by a feminist slash atheist YouTuber who is also related to free thought blogs. And anyone who knows a bit about these scumbags, I cannot call them out, actually I shouldn't call them otherwise, knows that they have had the tendency in the past to try to shut down whoever disagreed with them, whoever didn't share their opinions, certainly. And in this particular case, what these people, or this person with the two accounts, did was try to get Girlwriteswhat apparently to release personal information about herself. Now, what happens is that if on YouTube you are given 3 different copyright infringement notices, your channel is automatically shut down until you file a counterclaim. And you can get it restored, certainly, to my understanding. Though I'm not very clear on the details. But in any case, what happened here was that these people had only posted 2 different notices, and this is a strategy apparently to get people to produce counterclaims in order to avoid having their channel shut down. And the problem with these counterclaims is that they require that the person give up personal information, and as a consequence these copyright infringement claims can be used in order to dox someone, in order to obtain personal details. And what Girlwriteswhat did was she talked about it on her channel. She talked about potentially filing a lawsuit against YouTube, and immediately afterwards a lot of people decided to give her money, financial support for this, to donate to her. And this is all wonderful. If she does continue with legal action, then a lot of people who have been suffering from this sort of malicious attack will possibly take notice and support this on the internet, and eventually get Google and YouTube to change their policy concerning copyright infringement and possibly find a more decent solution for everyone. But the issue that was stated by Stardusk is that he also has a lot of men's rights videos. I would say that they're all of high quality, and at the same time he pretty much said that because he's a man and Girlwriteswhat is a woman, he is far less likely to actually receive support than she is, financial support certainly, as well as campaigning support and so forth. And I want to say that from my perspective this is true. It has been the case. I have been a victim of child abuse, and beyond that of bullying in high school, at university, partly because of the fact that I was psychologically vulnerable to these things for a variety of reasons I'm not going to go into here. But basically what I saw was that in a lot of cases, if I were harassed or abused by a woman, a lot of people would take her side and no one would actually take my side because, well, she's a woman. And in this brave new world, women have a lot more respect than men do because they're women. It doesn't have to make any sense, it doesn't have to be logical, it doesn't have to be fair or just, it's just people being stupid. And I want to say this, basically, I think that this can be rectified. I think this can be corrected, not easily, but certainly if enough people actually recognize that this is a problem and take a stance against it, they can fix it. And I think in your case, Stardusk, you might be cynical and say that people aren't going to do this, that people are wired to always support women and look down on men, especially men who are vulnerable, who are suffering. I don't really believe this. I think that there is a portion of the population that currently doesn't talk much about this sort of thing, that has the psychological capacity to take a strong stance against abuse being perpetrated against men of any kind, really, including this sort of doxing attempt, but just doesn't do it because we haven't had the practice. As in, we're not used to actually standing up for other men, because it's just, how should I say this? Whenever this sort of thing happens, a lot of us are caught like deer in the headlights. But I know for a fact, and this is why I wanted to make this video, I know for a fact that if the same thing had happened to you, I would put in the same amount of money as I would have rather for Girlwriteswhat. Because look, I know that evil is evil, that malicious actions, that underhand actions, that deception and the abuse of laws and institutional rules, these things are evil. And I don't care about men and women, so I care about good and evil. I want to do good and oppose evil. And I'm pretty sure that there are plenty of men out there, maybe a small minority, but a sufficiently large minority certainly, and plenty of women out there who have the same attitude, who are actually willing to say, I stand against evil. These people have committed an evil action with evil intentions. I will stand against them. And be completely unswayed by any sort of biological prerogative to protect women and I guess compete against men. I have to say this, I think a lot more people should actually start saying and showing support for men, start saying that we will not take this sort of crap towards anyone, and we will support any man who is in any sort of difficulty of this nature. I really think it's important to understand that back in the 60s they didn't talk about child abuse, so adolescents, for example, who had experienced child abuse didn't realize what was going on. And this was the case even for violent child abuse, as in nowadays certainly people don't understand psychological abuse very well, but nowadays if a child were being physically beaten by their parents, I would say that he would have a much higher chance of realizing that this is abuse and that this has to stop and be opposed than they would have had in the 60s. And the thing is, people weren't organized back then. They really weren't. And likewise, if you look at child sexual abuse in the Catholic Church, people weren't organized. But as soon as they got organized, as soon as they started saying, right, we are not going to take this garbage, we're going to fight against those scumbags, as soon as they started doing this, they started solving their problems. They started getting together and actually pooling resources into opposing them. So I do understand that it can be very demoralizing to see that a lot of people don't care about you. But I think it's equally important to acknowledge that if you care about someone, if you care about certain people in a certain group of people who are being victimized and do not have a means to defend themselves because they're marginalized, then I think it's important to show support and stand up for them. Seriously, it's really the first step, and it's a step that a lot of people should take, and it's a step that I am perfectly happy to take. Now I will say this, I know that you've faced adultery, that you faced psychological abuse from past lovers, well, girlfriends, and I know that you have had no legal recourse against them. I do know that, just like I don't have the prospect of going against any woman who decides to do this crap against me. You don't at this stage either. But and I know how painful it is to know that people would stand up to defend the perpetrator rather than you, the victim, in this sort of case. But I also know that laws can be changed, and rather than being fatalistic and believing that people would not stand up to, how should I say this, take proper action against such scumbags, instead of believing this, you can simply try to reach out to those who are willing to do this, and at the same time take a stance and claim that you will be willing to do this yourself, as well as honor that stance later on when the opportunity to act arises. Now I gotta say this, I do know you're a libertarian and that you don't believe in violence. I 100% believe in violence. I believe that the individuals who are evil, who take pleasure in causing suffering intrinsically, who take pleasure in humiliating, in ridiculing, in belittling others, who actually enjoy running people into the ground for the sake of running people into the ground, I know that these people deserve to die, that these people deserve to be exterminated. And certainly most people would be loath to consider this sort of thing, but they would be willing to consider putting such people in prison. I mean, about a third of the population um, said of the population in the US once said that they would be willing that they would like to have a law against adultery, for example, to criminalize adultery. And I would be willing to bet that a lot of people would also want to have a law against this sort of practice, against this sort of underhand malicious practice of trying to snipe at people using institutional procedures, I guess, perverting these institutional procedures rather. I know that not that many people actually like the idea of exploiting institutional rules. A lot of people value them, they understand their importance. So providing a better legal climate to take action against the people who abuse institutional procedures this way, I think would be more than welcome. And as well as that legal climate, because I've been talking about the law, but what really matters is the culture. After all, the culture is ultimately the pillar on which the law actually stands. I think it's equally important to show support to one another, and not just as people, but also as men, because it is the case that the idea of a man seeking support, seeking the strength of others for his problems, for threats against him, certainly for threats that have arisen as a consequence of him being a man, is tabooed in our culture. And I think this needs to change, because honestly, seeking support doesn't mean not having strength or the willingness to fight against, to oppose your own problems, to oppose those who create your own problems. It means that in the current legal climate, in which you cannot just go up to these people and punch them in the face, you have to campaign, you have to take collective action. And honestly, it is a show of strength, not a show of, I guess, weakness or incompetence, to stand up and together with other people want to take a stance against the perpetrators, and to try to change the legal climate and the cultural climate so that these people will not be able to act with impunity.